What is happening, guys? Kati Plays here, bringing you another Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel video. And in today's video, we're going to be doing a tier list for the upcoming new format that is going to be, basically starting post Flame of Fury, the new selection pack coming out in 3 days here for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. This is going to be introducing a lot of new stuff to the deck. First and foremost, Kashtira is coming pretty much full power to the format. We have Kashtira Arise-Heart, Kashtira Theosis, so all the other, Kashtira monsters that weren't already in the game. The field spell as well, Pressure Planet. All this stuff is coming to Master Duel finally, so we're going to have Kashtira meta, essentially. That happened in the OCG, it happened in the TCG for a very long time, and it is now coming to Master Duel. Also, we have some Gishki support. This is going to be, in my opinion, fairly impactful in the meta with Sprite, so we'll be talking about that deck today. We have Rescue Ace. We don't have all the Rescue Ace support, so once we get to the Rescue Ace part of the tier list, I will talk about that a little bit more in depth. And then we've got Prediction Princess. We all know what this is, but I'll talk about it when we get to this part of the tier list. And then finally, we have Triple Tactics Thrust, which isn't really going to be a focus of this part of the video, in particular, because it's a tier list video. This is more like a staple card, so every deck can play this. But if we're talking just impact on the game, this is one of the most impactful cards that has come to Master Duel in a very, very long time. So I might make a whole video about this. Let me know in the comment section down below if you want to see that. But it will definitely be in a future video if I do a board breaker tier list or staple tier list, so on and so forth. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk really quickly about the current state of the meta pre-release of this set. This is kind of what we're looking at here. Sorry, I'll get rid of these ads for you guys. This is kind of what we're looking at. We got Purely, Dragons, Lab, Materia, all these stuff down here is kind of like the meta, the best decks in the game currently. And then as far as top decks go, there's a lot of stuff that's being played. Master Duel has done a really good job about keeping the meta fairly diverse and making it so a lot of decks can continue to play no matter what the format is. So we'll see if that's going to still be the case with the new Kashtira cards coming out. So I've already wasted enough of y'all's time with this intro, so let's go ahead and jump into the tier list. We have 7 categories to talk about today. The first one is Meta Warping. I've kind of replaced tier 1 with this category, and the reason I've done this is because there's going to be a lot of decks that can compete and can win tournaments, that can reach the highest rank of ladder, whatever it might be. Meta Warping, however, are the decks that are going to do exactly that. They're going to warp the meta. Everything is going to have to revolve around them. And if you can't compete with those decks, spoiler alert, then you really can't compete in this format. So they're definitely tier 1 decks, and they're probably the best decks in the game, but they also kind of define the meta. Contenders are exactly what they sound like. These are contenders to the meta warpers. These are decks that can beat the meta warpers. These are decks that can win tournaments, get the highest rank on ladder, win Challenger Cups, whatever it is you're competing in. These decks can win. Can compete is, sound like a broken record already, but it's exactly what it sounds like. These are decks that can compete, but aren't positioned as well as contenders to do so. Kind of struggling. These are decks that are in a rough place right now for one reason or another. Maybe it's because there's a new card that's a floodgate that's going to oppress the meta, or maybe it's because the format is just warped in such a way that the end goal of these strategies doesn't exactly fit in with this particular meta. WTF is, what the fuck, why are you playing this deck? Whether this is bad or you're annoying for playing this deck, whatever it might be. Experimental, these are decks that have potential perhaps, or haven't been solved, or whatever it might be good in the future. We don't know. These are kind of unknowns in the format. Then solo mode is exactly what it sounds like, guys. These are decks that you should take back to the anime, go to solo mode, put them in Duel Links. They might be good there, who knows, but they're not good in Master Duel. So let's jump on into the first deck. It is At Ignister. So At Ignister is going to be our first kind of struggling deck. And the reason this deck is here and not in the can compete category is because the end board of this deck is a towers-like monster. It's a rival, or it's like the big firewall guy, the Link 5. The reason this is not great right now is just because of the amount of kaijus that are in the format. Kaiju is not the best out to a card like, Noir, but it's one of the best outs to Noir, and it can go in any deck, and it can play against a lot of things. So in a meta where kaijus are really good, a deck that puts up a towers monster that's slightly less oppressive than Noir is just nowhere near as strong. Black Wings, I'm gonna just put these here because why are you playing Black Wings? Kinda, sorta. Another name for this category would be like event decks when I'm too lazy to craft something good, or this is the deck they give you as like a trial deck in the events. That's another name for this WTF category. So I'm just going to put Black Wings here and move on to save some time. Blue Eyes, obviously we know where that's at, solo mode. The best card in this deck is Magnamut. Dark Magician, this is obviously in solo mode. The best card in this deck is Kashtira Fenrir. Dark World, well, Dark World is kind of like this, but better than Black Wings. It's WTF. Like, if you're playing this, it's just kind of toxic, and I hope you can't deck me out when I max you, or I hope you get drolled. Dinomorphia is quite interesting, to be honest. I have a hard time ranking this deck. I really don't know where to put it. Part of me wants to put it in the, like, kind of struggling category, but also can compete. I'm going to put it in can compete. I'm going to go against, like, my instinct and saying kind of struggling. The reason being is because this deck is actually pretty solid into the best decks in the game, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. You know what? We'll go and talk about them now. Purely and Kashtira are going to be the best decks in the game. However, Dinomorphia actually plays quite well into those, because Arise-Heart is not too oppressive against this deck. This deck kind of just sets 5. It can put up its own floodgates. And then against, Purely, like, you just put up giant skill drains. What does Purely do against that, right? It's pretty cool. It might not be the best trap deck in the game, but I definitely think it can compete. And if you're going to bring it to a tournament or play it on ladder, I think you can have some real success with it, especially if you tech the deck out correctly. Dinos are always really hard for me to rank, because dinos can beat anything, but they can also lose to anything. They can also just lose to themselves. They're kind of just floating there in the middle of mediocrity. So just to go with the theme of dinos, I'm going to put them in kind of struggling, because they're always kind of struggling. It's nothing about dinos. It's like the deck ceiling is like the best deck in the game, which is crazy, but its floor is so bad. And it's such a weird deck. But we do have Oviraptor at 3 now. We got Pankratops at 3. So you know what? Maybe we can put this deck up here. I'm also going to put it up here just to save face, because I know there's a lot of Dino fans, so don't get mad at me. Moving on to the next deck. This is Pendulums. This is the first Pendulum deck we're going to be talking about. This is Draco Slayer. I personally am actually going to go ahead and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and rank all the Pendulum decks really quickly. Spoiler alert, they're all in the same category, because they're all virtually the same thing, just slightly different, just like Cyber's decks. Yeah, good job, Konami. Really good. I think that's all the Pen decks. These 4, yeah, we're chilling. Okay, so we're going to talk about all 4 of these really quickly. I personally think Draco Slayer is the best, and then probably Valens, and then probably Pin Magicians, and probably Endymion. So the reason these decks are in the kind of struggling category is because they're always struggling, because they're a Pendulum deck, and they're just struggling because the mechanic is awful. Rightfully so. It was toxic and it was good. But they're also struggling because of Kashtira, right? So Kashtira can zone lock, of course. So zone locking, not all the zones anymore, because Diablosis is banned. But if you use Kashtira, Shangri-La, however you want to pronounce it, to lock one of the Pendulum zones, going second, the Pendulum player just really can't play. Now going first, the deck is still like oppressively strong sometimes, unless you get like maxi, drolled, potentially nibbed. It loses to like the, just like the blowout hand traps, like those. But if it goes first, it can generally just set up some pretty oppressive boards that aren't going to really... It's really a 50-50 kind of deck, right? These are 50-50 decks. You win the coin toss, you're chilling. You lose the coin toss, you're probably not chilling. I don't know how familiar a lot of you guys are with the various, team war leagues that are going on in Master Duel, but one of the most popular formats now is a 5v5 best of 1. So game 1, it's a coin toss. Then the loser gets replaced by a teammate, and they get to choose whether they go first, and it's the first to win 5. In those formats, Pendulum's actually quite good, because you can just counterpick Pendulums against a deck like Purely, or against a deck like, I'm drawing a blank, Naturia Runick, which are very popular in those formats, and you can just kind of like shut them out with Anti-Spell, with Secret Village, I should say. So these decks are really good in those formats, but on ladder, they don't really have that same power, because they can't guarantee they're going first. So they're kind of struggling just for those reasons. The next deck is Drytron, and I'm going to maybe cope a little bit. I'm going to put Drytron up here in the can compete category. I played against Drytron the other day on ladder, and it was actually, quite impressive what it was able to do. It's got an infinite grind game. It's one of those decks that just can play forever. And now that Bystials are virtually completely out of the format, especially with Kashtira being prevalent now, like Kashtira is going to be really popular. Dragons are going to lose a little bit of popularity. Bystials in general are going to go down in popularity. So a deck like Drytron can really do something like kind of special in a format like this. The biggest issue right now with Drytron, so I'm actually going to go and pull this up really quickly, is Herald. So Herald is still at 1. This is obviously at 1 because of the Ishizu cards, and as long as the Ishizu cards were relevant, this kind of had to be at 1. But now that, well, the Ishizu cards are, 2 of them are banned now, and 2 of them are limited to 1, maybe this can come back. And if this comes back, Drytron will be sitting in a really good place because it's virtually unlimited other than that. 2 Benton is not perfect, but it's still very, very good. The next deck I want to talk about is Exo Sister. This obviously is in the can compete category. This deck does not need graveyard-centric strategies to play against for it to be good. Martha solves all those problems. This deck can play perfectly fine against decks that don't use the graveyard. It really comes down to if this deck draws the proper non-engine, because going first, this deck is incredibly powerful. Magnifica plus the 2 traps is almost an unbreakable inboard no matter what it is, unless you have some sort of like really powerful board breaker, right? So this is just a very strong deck going first. Going second, it has a lot of room for non-engine. Of course, it can play Shifter, which might be less prevalent in this format than in other formats because Kashtira is a Shifter, but it can still play Shifter. It can obviously play all the other like Maxi, all that stuff. It can play any board breaker you want. A deck like this can always compete unless it gets hit on the ban list, which obviously is not going to happen because it's not that good. I'm going to go ahead and jump down here to Flunderies, wherever it is. Oh, it's right next to it. Good job. And I'm going to put it right here next to Exo Sister because they're not the same deck, obviously, but they're very similar in the sense of like they can just win. They can beat anything. Going first, they have a very oppressive boards. They can set up Harpies. If they can set up Harpy's Featherstorm, the deck becomes incredibly powerful. The deck is going to obviously, I already know I said I wasn't going to really talk about it, but the deck's obviously going to play Thrust, and going first, if your opponent hand traps you, you can just Thrust for Harpy's Featherstorm, and that's just game, right? Obviously, this deck gets around Max C, which is really nice. It doesn't really lose to it doesn't really lose to Arise-Heart that bad. Arise-Heart can be a little annoying, attaching your banished birds, but at the end of the day, this deck can play fine in this format. It can play all the board breakers, all the hand traps, XYZ. So this deck is sitting in a pretty good spot. Thank the Lord Master Duel hit this, because this deck is so incredibly toxic. I cannot stand Flunderies, and the fact that this deck is so nerfed just brings me joy. I know I'm a hater, but the fact that these are both at 1 just brings me joy. I wish they would just ban them, to be honest, but I know they're not going to do that. They probably shouldn't do that either. The deck doesn't need to be banned, but I don't like it. But anyways, moving on to our first contender. That is going to be Runick Furhire. So this is arguably the best Runick version in the variant in the game. I'm not going to argue that, but there is an argument to be made that this is the best Runick version because of the ceiling this deck provides. This deck has by far the highest ceiling of a Runick deck because, Fogel drawing basically 6 cards a turn, Fogel plus Fountain, of course, drawing like 6 to 9 cards a turn is absolutely absurd. And the biggest issue with this is, of course, Max C can be an issue. Droll can be a serious issue, which Droll might not be too popular in this upcoming format, but if it is for whatever reason, this does kind of, the ceiling of this kind of drops because there's more counterplay in the format to it. This is one of the decks, these are Runick decks in general are one of the decks that can like really compete with Kashtira because all the Runick spells are very, very good into the cash board. Yeah, they get banished, which does suck, but being able to have, 2 tip, 2 flashing fire, 2 freezing curses. So basically, not 2 flashing fire, 3 flashing fire, 2 freezing curses, and 2 tip, all as outs, realistically, quote unquote, outs to Arise-Heart, makes it so this deck can play pretty well going second into a Kashtira board. They kind of need lands at that point. If they don't have lands, you're kind of in a good spot. Also, they don't need to activate monster effects. So Fenrir and Unicorn, well, they sometimes need to activate monster effects, but usually not in like inopportune times for them. They can play without monster effects for the most part. Just Hugin as your monster effect, get your field spell to your hand. If they're going to Fenrir, they got to do it now or whatever. Then you can just play your Fountain, and then you can play with Runick cards. And for the most part, you can play under the Kashtira board fairly well with the Runick strategy. It's not perfect because the banishing does really hurt. Obviously, the banish effect from Arise-Heart hurts, but Runick has a shot. The Runick engine always has a shot going second, then going first. It's one of the most powerful engines in the game, by far. The next deck is Gishki Sprite. So this is one of the new decks I want to talk about. And really quickly, I'm going to jump over here to this little Master Duel meta page. And I'm going to talk about these new cards really quickly. We're probably getting all 4 of these. I actually don't even know what this one does. I don't think it's played. But these guys right here are very, very good. This is Monster Negate. It's a non-once per turn monster negate. So basically, as long as you have multiple of these on the field, or you can get this guy into the field in multiple times, multiple different ways with the trap or whatever it might be, you can negate multiple monster effects. Very, very strong. This card right here, the Gishki level 2 guy, and this, focused Aqua Mirror are 1-card combos. These are 1-card combos that end in, approximately 2 to 4 negates and multiple other disruptions from the Sprite cards. I don't know if this is going to be the best way to play Sprite going forward, but I think it might be because this version can play without Sprend, you can play without Beaver is what I'm saying. You don't need the Sprend Beaver package for this deck to, be successful, because the deck is actually you're kind of tight on space because you need to play these, you need to play these, you need to play this, you need to play the ritual spell. You might play the trap, maybe. I know Master Duel players were 100% going to play the trap because they're kind of degenerate. And you also need to play the Abyss, the Vision, the Shadow. So you need to play a lot of Gishki cards in the deck, which means you have less room for Sprite cards. Not Sprite cards, but Sprite accessories. So the cards like the Nimble package, the Angler package, the Swap Frog, so on and so forth like that. You might not play those in this version, which means this might be the best version because all that stuff is very nerfed, right? We got Swap Frog at 1, right? Swap Frog is limited to 1. Beaver is now limited to 1. So the Gishki cards might be the best way to play Sprite. It remains to be seen because they're very weak into Max C, but who knows? They could be really good, and I might cope on this a little bit, but I'm going to put this up here in the can compete category. I'm going to put it right below the the clearly meta decks, right? Like these decks right here. Well, Drytron's not clearly meta, but Exo and Flu are clearly meta. I'm going to put it right behind those because I think it definitely can compete, but we might not know for a little bit, but it's definitely going to be good. The next deck is Goaty. So I'm going to put Goaty in the experimental category because I really don't know. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I don't know how this deck is going to perform in the new meta. We are going to be in a banish meta, which means that Goaty's not necessarily going to struggle against anything because it likes cards getting banished. The issue is, it doesn't like its cards getting banished face down. The issue is, it doesn't like its cards that are getting banished getting stolen by Arise-Heart. So how does that really factor in with this deck? I don't know. We'll see. But I think it could be experimental, and I think it could actually be pretty decent. This deck is always quite scary to play against because you never know what's going to happen. It could kind of just pop off at any moment. It can kind of sack you. So I'll put it in experimental. Maybe it gets up in that can compete category, but I kind of doubt it. Now, we're on to the elephant in the room. So Kashtira is the next deck, and it is obviously going to be meta warping. The only nerfs that we have to this deck are Fenrir 2. I'm just going to go ahead and pull this up really quickly. So these are the Kashtira cards, right? Got Fenrir 2, Pressure Planet at 1. This is just basically a generic searcher. I'll read it really quickly. When this card is activated, you can add 1 Kashtira monster from your deck to your hand. Then monsters you control gain 100 attack and defense for each attribute on the field. That's actually pretty important. If a Kashtira Shangri-Ira you control activate its effect, except during the damage step, you can target 1 card on the field and destroy it. It's pretty powerful. You can only use this effect of Pressure Planet once per turn. You can only activate 1 Pressure Planet once per turn. So really, this is just a activate add any Kashtira card, right? Then it's got that bonus effect, just like the Tier Planet did, that can come up in weird random points. Obviously, the Tier Planet is way better than this one, just in my opinion, but this one is still very, very good. This one's at 1, so it hits a consistency hit. Then Fenrir is obviously kind of quote-unquote a consistency hit, being at 2, whatever. Then Tier Limits Kashtira is also limited to 1, but this is not played in a pure Kashtira deck. This is played in a Tier Limits deck or a Tier Cash deck. Right. Other than that, everything's good. I mean, another thing of note is Pot of Prosperity. Pot of Prosperity is at 1. This can kind of hurt because you want cards banished face down because you can then reattach them with Arise-Heart. So people were playing cards like Intis. Intis, Goliath, and other extra deck cards that you could just banish face down and reattach them to the Arise-Heart and then get effects when they're sent, or for whatever purpose. So this might be a bit of a hit to the deck, but not really. I mean, you can just substitute it out for other non-engine or maybe even Pot of Extravagance. Probably not, but we'll see. Depends on what route they want to go with. But yeah, I mean, Kashtira power level, ceiling-wise, is as good as it's ever going to really get. I mean, Diablosis is banned, but that's not a Kashtira card, right? Screw that card also. But that's the only thing that's kind of lowering the ceiling of this deck is Diablosis being banned, which that card probably should never got printed. Like, that card's pretty degenerate. So this deck is in a great spot. Unfortunately for all of us, it's in a great spot. And it's going to be meta warping, because if your deck cannot directly address Arise-Heart going second, then you're going to be in a really tough spot. You really have to build your non-engine for Kashtira. You have to build your non-engine for this deck and one other deck we'll talk about here in a little bit. And it's just how it is. It's quite unfortunate that we're going to be in this meta for the next few months. In my opinion, it's unfortunate, but hopefully it's not as bad as I think it's going to be. We have Try Sprite up next, and I'm just going to put this deck in kind of struggling because it is. The Beaver hit really, really hurts this deck. I don't know why they hit Beaver, to be honest with you. I'm assuming they hit Beaver for two reasons. One, because they didn't want to hit Elf and give us URCP back. Elf, Starter, or Blue. They didn't want to hit any of those and give us our UR back. And also, maybe because they wanted to push Gishki. I don't know. They really didn't need to push this pack because Arise-Heart was going to sell it anyways and Thrust was going to sell it anyways. But maybe they did it to push Gishki Sprite. Gishki Sprite is a very cool deck, by the way. I'm very excited to try it myself in Master Duel. It kind of only fell off in the TCG because Elf got banned. But before that, it was very strong. But yeah, I don't really know why they hit Beaver, frankly. It was an interesting hit. It is what it is. But because of that, Try Sprite is really struggling now. It was also struggling before just because Sprite in general has a problem going second. And we're getting to a point in Master Duel where almost all the best decks can go first really well or can compete pretty well going second. And Sprite is one of the decks that kind of struggles to do that. But, maybe maybe the Gishki cards will help with that. I don't know. They really don't help too well going second, but who knows? Maybe someone will figure something out. Then we have Labyrinth. Labyrinth is obviously a contender. I don't know if this is above or below the Runick cards. I'm going to put it above right now because Lab just plays so well into literally everything. It really doesn't have bad matchups. That might be a little debatable, but its bad matchup is Ash Blossom. Like, its bad matchup is getting ashed on, Big Welcome. Other than that, the deck plays really well into anything. It can go second a lot better than people realize. If going second, the deck plays a lot of hand traps, a lot more hand traps than one might realize. It plays Max C, it plays Ash Blossom, it plays Imperm, it can play Gamma. And then obviously the Labyrinth cards are kind of hand traps too, because if you open Clock plus Stovey or Chandelier, you can play on your opponent's first turn, and that's quite insane. You can set up to play as soon as your turn starts with your trap cards. And the deck's only going to get better with time because there is more support coming out for Labyrinth. Not too much more, but a little bit more. We'll get that probably in the very near future, and not the very near future, the very far off future. But this deck's only going to get better over time, and it's still very, very good right now. The next deck is Live Twins. This is going to be whatever version of Live Twin you want. It's probably, except for Pure. So it's going to be like Live Twin Sprite or Live Twin Runick Sprite is really kind of what I'm going with here. And this deck can obviously compete. It's right there with the Gishki. It's probably better than the Gishki stuff, to be honest. But you know what? It's probably better than the Gishki stuff, but I'll cope and say the Gishki stuff is better for now just because I want to see new versions of Sprite come out. But the Live Twin stuff is really good. It substitutes the Beavers and the Swap Frogs as the normal summons with the Live Twin cards. And it's kind of like a more old school, OG style of Sprite. It's perfectly fine. Not too much to say about it. Then we got Madolche here. Madolche is probably, I want to say it's kind of struggling. That feels a little disrespectful to this deck because this deck is pretty good. It's really cool too. The issue is like the Vernisifs, however you say those things, they don't really work too well under Arise-Heart, right? It really sucks. And now they can small world for kaijus, they can small world for Pankratops. They kind of already played small world anyways, so that really helps. But the Verns struggle into cash, so they're kind of struggling for that reason. Also, well, that's pretty much it. That's really it. I mean, I don't really like. It's really just that. Other than that, the deck is like perfectly fine. It can definitely like beat anything, especially because people really don't know how to play against it. But yeah, moving on to Marincess here. Where do we want to put Marincess? Probably want to put Marincess. It's probably like better than Agnister, but not quite in that can compete category right now. It might be in the can compete category because if you're really thinking about it, it's probably better than Dinos. Yeah, we'll do this. We'll put it up here in the can compete category, right above Dinos. Gosh, guys, I'm gonna have to move Dinos down. I don't know. Putting it in that category feels weird. But no. I'll leave it because I know there's Dino fans out there. I'm doing this for you guys, by the way, not for me. If it was me, this deck would be down in WTF. But in all seriousness, Dinos are pretty solid. But Marincess is good. It can play a lot of non-engine. It can play whatever non-engine it wants. Something this deck really benefited from, and I'm going to go ahead and throw Salad up here too, wherever Salad might be. Yeah, okay. We're going to throw Salad up here right next to it. I personally think Salad's a bit better. But one of the reasons these decks benefited so much in previous formats was the fact that Bystials were really good. And Bystials being really good means that these decks were even better because Bystials were not good against them. So these were like the best Cyber stacks for a good while there when Bystials were very popular. However, now the Bystials aren't powerful, then Mathmech is clearly just like the best Cyber stack. So we'll go ahead and I'll talk about that in just a second. But like, why would you play these over Mathmech is kind of the question. Is the question we should be asking. And I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, you can definitely play these and see success with them, but Mathmech is clearly the best one. And I think Agnister is clearly the worst one because it's so much more reliant on its like towers-like monsters than these versions are, right? With Salad, you really don't put up any like oppressive inboard. You kind of just play trap cards and maybe put up a Baguska or maybe put up a few hand traps, have a few hand traps in your hand, whatever it might be. And then the goal is to survive, right? With Marincess, you can put up that tower stuff, but you can also put up other stuff as well. And you obviously have the trap in your hand. You obviously have the searchable imperm. It's really cool. XYZ. So they're cool. I say they're cool. They're Cyber stacks. Are they really cool? I don't know. But they're solid. Then we got Mathmech here. Mathmech is obviously going in the contenders category. This deck is phenomenal. There's been a resurge in popularity for Mathmech because Bystials have been on the decline. And if Bystials aren't good, then this deck is phenomenal. It can play half of the deck is non-engine. Half the deck can be hand traps, breakers, whatever you want. Then the other half can just be ways to get to circular. That's how this deck functions, and that's how this deck wins. It's kind of really annoying, and it's not fun at all. It's not at all fun to play against. It's not fun to play with, at least in my opinion. But it works. It can play Small World, which means it can have access to the Gamma play against Arise-Heart. For those of you who don't know, Arise-Heart's attached from Banished Pile as mandatory, so you can go Small World into Gamma, Arise, mandatory attach, Gamma it. That's a pretty cool play. If you guys didn't know about that, you can also just Small World into a Kaiju, take it out. It's chilling. I think it is one of the worst decks in the contenders category, though, because it's so reliant on non-engine. Its engine is very strong, but its engine alone is not going to like break a lot of boards. It kind of is relying on those non-engine cards. Whereas with Runick decks, its entire engine is the deck basically. So its engine is like just super strong. And with Labyrinth, its engine is what wins at games. Like its non-engine is like solid and it can like help you win games, but its non-engine is what's going to get you there. Its engine is what's going to get you there. And you play primarily engine cards, and even your non-engine kind of becomes engine when they're imperms and stuff like that. So I hope all that makes sense. I hope I'm not really contradicting myself too much on these, but I think this is probably correct. Then we got Makenko here. Makenko can definitely compete. I think it's at the bottom of the can compete category, like just being as objective as possible. But it can definitely compete. It's really interesting, that this deck is really good in this format. It's great because it's the best of one format, and you can't really build for a deck like Makenko on the ladder, because if you do, then you're going to kind of get punished by other stuff, right? So it's in a really interesting spot. This did win a Meta Weekly a few weeks ago, or last week or whatever, which is absolutely insane. Like, I don't know how that happened. The deck's not that hard to play against. But it's quite interesting that it was able to, win a tournament. And it's because, like, people aren't prepared for it. You have to play a certain way against this deck. And if you're not prepared to play that way, or not prepared to build your deck in that way, then you're going to really struggle against this deck. However, this deck really only is as good as the counterplay is to it, I guess I should say. If people are prepared for it, if they know how to play against it, if they know how to combat it, then this deck really struggles. On ladder, that's not really an issue, because if you're preparing for Makenko on ladder, like I already said, you're going to lose into other stuff. But in tournaments, that's when this is going to kind of like fall off, in my opinion. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, because it did win one of those tournaments. Then we got Naturia Runick. I personally think this is still the best version of Runick. I don't really like it. It's the most solid. Like, it's just rock solid, right? It's Max C is solid against it, but not insane against it. You can play under Max C fairly well, depending on your hand in this deck. Droll, same thing. You can kind of play around Droll fairly well. It can go first very well. It can obviously go first insanely well. Going second, Mole Cricket is an insane card. Like, Mole Cricket is just absolutely absurd as a card. And it's just got a lot of tools. I don't know. It doesn't have the ceiling that For Hire has, but I think it's got a higher floor than For Hire. I think it's a more well-rounded version of Runick, and I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over here, but I just think it's really solid, whereas this deck is a little bit more volatile. So I prefer Naturia for those reasons. I'm going to go ahead and talk really quickly about Runick Sprite. I think Runick Sprite, it's either slightly better than For Hire or slightly worse than For Hire. The reason I don't love Runick Sprite right now is just because of all the hits to Sprite. I think the deck lacks a little bit of consistency because you don't have as much access to the Sprite cards. Whereas, like, with the For Hire cards, you don't want to play all those Sprite cards. You want to play Rex, and you want Rex to be your main starter. Whereas in, like, the Runick Sprite, you want to see one of your Sprite cards. And just having 5 of them, 2 starter, 1 jet, and 2 blue, just like makes it so you have to go gigantic for your Sprite cards more often than not. And that's not what you want to be doing. You want to be going gigantic for, like, Hyperia or Ipera, whatever you say it, or for the cap shell to draw more cards. You don't want to be going gigantic for Sprite cards. You want to be drawing 1 to 2 Sprite cards and then using gigantic to summon your other utility pieces in the deck. This is not a big deal, right? Like, I'm saying this, but it's not that big of a deal. The deck is still phenomenal. It's still one of the best decks in the game. It is super slept on. It might be the best deck of these 3 Runick versions versus Kashtira. But overall, I still think it probably goes Naturia, For Hire, or Sprite, with a little bit of variance here. But again, I've said this like a million times already. This is like picking between like 98, 99, and $100. They're virtually all the same thing. Like, if you found $98 on the street, just like sitting on the side of the road, you're gonna be happy. Yeah, you might be slightly happier with finding 99 or 100, but you're still really happy with 98, right? That's probably just a terrible comparison, a terrible way to talk about this, but that's just what I came up with off the top of my head. And that's kind of how I think about these decks. They're all phenomenal, but these 2 are just slightly better. Maybe this, I don't know. It's just pick them. All right, this is a bit embarrassing. We're going to move on to the next deck. Ninjas, yeah, okay, this is going to be actually even more embarrassing. I've not read a single ninja card. I don't know what any of them do. I know what the old ones do. I know what Hanzo does. I don't know what any of the new ones do, though. And I'm sorry about that. But I'm also not that sorry because I've never had a reason to read them. But yeah, I actually meant to read them before recording this, and I forgot. I read all the new cards. I read like the Prediction Princess cards, which is saying something because that was painful. But yeah, I'm going to put this in experimental just because I don't know what they do. Sorry. Yeah. Numeron. Yeah, what the fuck? This indicates any going second strategy. Any blind second deck. So Ancient Warrior, Blind Axe, 8-axis, whatever, Numeron, all that crap. What the fuck? Sorry for my profanity, but what the fuck? Phantom Knights. I don't know. I mean, it's either experimental or kind of struggling. But I actually think it's experiment. No. It's struggling. Sorry, guys. This deck's struggling. Arise is just kind of oppressive against something like this. I don't really know why you'd play this deck. Yeah. And going first is not even that good. Going first, like, what are you putting up? You're putting up, like, an Appaloosa and a DPE and a trap card? A monster? Yeah, like, what are you doing? Like, this deck's not even that good going first. Going second, it's got Zeus, but that's really it. I don't know. Poor PKs. Then we got Plunder Runick. So, Plunder Runick is pretty cool. I don't know how good it is, but it's pretty cool. I'm going to put it in can compete. Listen, guys, this might be like coping a little bit, but the fact that this deck main decks kaijus just because it needs to for its engine, or doesn't need to, but it wants to for its engine, because this deck plays, the non-engine this deck plays, it doesn't play like talents and stuff. It plays the kaijus. Because you want to put a kaiju on your opponent's board to give them an attribute to use your plunder cards. So it's really, really cool. And in a format where kaijus are phenomenal, this deck is actually pretty good. I'm kind of talking myself into pushing this thing up on the tier list, but the plunder cards are just kind of flawed in general. So I'm going to leave it here and hope I'm wrong. I hope it's better, but I think it's probably in this can compete, kind of middle of like the can compete category. Then we got Prank Kids. This is going to be like whatever version of Prank Kids you want, like Adventure Prank Kids, Sprite Prank Kids, Pure Prank Kids, whatever you want to go with. I'm going to put in experimental. As long as, hold on. As long as this is at 1, the deck is going to be struggling. But there's ways to make it work, right? It is experimental, and there are different like ways to like play this deck. It's really interesting with the Sprite cards. Just putting that out there. Then we got Prediction Princess. So I read these cards, and that is time I'm never getting back. This deck sucks. It's probably better than Blue Eyes, though. And actually, Dark Magician is definitely better than Blue Eyes because level 7 synergies. Haha. Yeah, this deck sucks. What the whole point of this deck is it wants to basically get this new thing on the field and then start flipping up and flipping down your monsters and playing flip monsters from the deck, like, and then just generating value off that. But the problem is it literally loses to 1 interruption. From everything that I've seen, this deck just loses to a single interruption. Like, why? Like, first of all, they put this in here just because they know, like, everybody is going to want Arise-Heart. Everyone's going to want Turbulence because it's going to be really good one day. Everyone's going to want Thrust. These are 3 cards that everyone's going to want. Then some people are going to want the Gishki cards. You need like 3 of this. You need 3 of this. Well, you really don't need 3 of this, but you're probably going to want to pull 3 of this anyways. You want 3, 3, and 3. We're going to pull like 20 of this freaking thing. And like none of these. I know my luck. That's what's happening. And that's why Konami did this. It's not very nice of them, but they kind of got to do it. So whatever. But yeah. Anyways, I wasted my time reading this, so maybe you don't have to. Punk is up next. So this is going to just be like Punk Cash, I guess. Because it's probably the best way to play this deck. I'm going to put it in kind of struggling just because like this is an objectively worse version of Kashtira than regular Cash. Just play the regular Kashtira deck and move on. Oh, Purely. Another Meta Warper. It's kind of hidden. Like, we don't know which one of these is going to be the best deck, but Kashtira is probably going to be the best deck and Purely right behind it. But it's a pick'em, right? This is like the same conversation here. I'm not going to repeat that, I promise. It's kind of just a pick 'em, you know, like these decks are both phenomenal. They both oppress the meta. They both have their own floodgates, quote unquote, in a sense. Like Arise-Heart's obviously a floodgate because everything gets banished. Noir is a floodgate because nothing can interact with it really. So if you don't have ways to address the Noir, if you don't have ways to address the Arise-Heart, in this current format, you're going to have a rough time. Sadly. But I like Purely way more than Kashtira, because Purely is actually pretty fun. But whatever. Next up is Rika. So, guys, listen. Anybody saying Rika is not good is smoking something. And it's not good shit, because they wouldn't be saying that if they were smoking something good. This deck is phenomenal. This deck can compete very well against Purely because Concon's a very good card. It forces Noir in potentially suboptimal, points to where you can like play through decently. It already plays Small World, so it can Small World into Gamma, it can Small World into Kaiju to address the Arise-Heart or against the Noir. It also can play decently under Arise-Heart's banishing, because this deck can play Shifter. I have a Rika player on my team, and in that, like I was talking about previously, that 5v5 war format where you would, send counter picks at different decks and you'd get to choose to go first. We would sometimes send him with Rika with Shifter in the deck. So if he was able to win game one, going second the next time, because his opponent's going to get to go first after he wins going first. You guys hopefully understand that. We could hopefully sack with Shifter, because this deck can, for the most part, play under Shifter. It's not great under Shifter. I'm not going to sit here and act like this deck is a Shifter deck now, but it can play under Shifter. So Arise-Heart's not going to be like absolutely oppressive versus it. The biggest problem this deck has in the current format is when it goes second into like Naturia, or really into Purely. Like these two decks are really good going first against it. But this deck can compete. So, also, everyone saying this deck loses to Max C has not played against a good Rika player. This deck does not lose to Max C objectively. It's like Dragon Link. Yes, Max C hurts it because Max C just hurts almost every deck in the game. But setting up a Con with a Sheet, maybe a Princess, some form or fashion under a Max C and like giving him like one, maybe two draws is very, very good. Very, very good. The deck can still set up like 2 to 3 interruptions under Max C and like 1 to 2 draws. Just like Dragon Link. Just like how Dragon Link can. Same thing with Droll and Lockbird. If it gets drolled, it can really suck, but it can still set up interruptions depending on the hand. Speaking of dragons, it's right there. I'm going to put dragons over Mathmech because I think in a format where dragons and Mathmech both exist, dragons are just simply better than Mathmech because dragons beat Mathmech. And also, I don't think that Mathmech is necessarily better into the rest of the field than Dragons is. Dragons is perfectly fine into the rest of the field because Dragons also play a crap ton of not like hand traps / non-engine, and it can adapt to the format, can play less Bestials if it needs to play more. And as long as this deck is not getting Shifted or Arise-Hearted, going second, this deck is like can beat anything, obviously. Yeah, I mean, that's really it. Like, I mean, it's going first, it's still Dragons. Like people saying this deck is dead are crazy. It's not dead. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. It's Dragons. It's chilling. Then we got Runick Stun here. Yeah, there's one place for it. Yeah. That wasn't even like a real thing, by the way. That was just, yeah. What the fuck? Then we got Scareclaw. Okay. Should I do it? Should I put this here? Should I do it? Probably not. Yeah, you know what? It's fine. We're gonna do it. I'm gonna put it behind Dinos, just because all the Dino fans. Okay, so Scareclaw's interesting. So Scareclaw is getting some new support. It is, I'll type in the full name. So we're getting Scareclaw Kashtira, which is obviously very good because now you can play Race Off. You can play Fenrir in the deck, which you already could anyways. You can play unicorn. You can play like a smaller Kashtira package and have a searchable Scareclaw Kashtira, which is quite nice. We're also getting like these cards, which this one's good. Twin Saw is good. The other two are kind of like mid, but Twin Saw is very good. And the deck already goes second pretty well. It can also go first pretty well. It can go second pretty well. I think it's interesting. Tryhart's a really great floodgate type card. So I think it can definitely compete. I'm excited to see what people cook up with this. I won't be doing it because this deck's got a lot of URs that I am not going to be crafting anytime soon. So hopefully everyone else can cook it, because I certainly won't be, but it is pretty cool. Sky Striker. I'm going to say Power Spell Striker is actually in a really good spot, because going second in this format is going to be really, really interesting. In the mirror match, Kashtira is going to want to go second, usually. In the match purely versus Kashtira, it kind of is like a coin toss, like whether you want to go first or second in that. Like, I think Purely probably still wants to go first, but Purely can definitely play going second. Excuse me, sorry about that. The biggest decks that like are going to always want to go first are decks like these here, are like the contenders, right? So like Labyrinth is always going to want to go first. All the Runick versions are obviously going to want to go first. Rick of Dragons, Mathmech, all this stuff like always wants to. Well, Mathmech maybe not. Like Mathmech does want to go first for sure, but it can go second fairly well. Same with Dragon. Like a lot of these decks can go second very well, but they all really want to go first. Whereas these two up here, they really don't care. They can go first or second and be fine normally. The issue with like something like Power Spell Striker is if you run into like just a massive no-R that you can't address. Like if they just don't let you address it. Like if they don't play into, Talons or they don't play into Thrust or whatever. Like, how do you really out it? Right. I mean, that doesn't seem like too realistic. Usually they're going to play into it anyways. They're going to probably play into Thrust, and which plays into like, Herald the Abyss or whatever. So you're probably going to be able to address this, which is actually quite nice. But there are different game states where Striker's just not going to be able to address the Purely board. But what Striker's really going to have a problem with is addressing like a Naturia Runick board with like a Naturia Beast on it or something. Or like a Labyrinth board that's just kind of playing Floodgates. It's kind of just floodgating you, right? But I do think Striker's interesting. I don't know why you would pick Striker as a going second deck when you could play Purely as a going second deck. Is the reason I'm going to put it down here as opposed to like up higher. Because also like this deck literally does not have an option going first. Like it just doesn't go first. It's only going second. And when you like kind of lock yourself into only going second, you're just setting yourself up for like a lot of rough games. No matter how much your deck is built for, it's just going to be rough sometimes. Then we got Pure Sprite. This is not kind of struggling. This is super struggling. You know what? I'm just going to put this in what the fuck. Why are you playing Pure Sprite? There's too many people on the ladder right now playing 3 Beavers when Beaver's limited to 1, guys. Like, start preparing to not have this card. It's pissing me off. No, but in all seriousness, like, this deck... It's not WTF, obviously. It's just struggling. It's not the best Sprite version anymore. You should be playing different versions of it. You should be playing like hybrid versions with like the Live Twin cards, the Gishki cards, maybe the Tri-Brigade cards, but probably the Runick cards. Just quit coping on regular Sprite. Spiral. This deck is eternally an experimental. I've kind of just made my mind up about that. It is an eternally experimental deck because one day it might be somewhat good. Stun. Yeah, what the fuck. Sword Soul. I mean, like always, Sword Soul can compete. Probably just top can compete, honestly. I mean, it's Sword Soul. It just does Sword Soul things. It's got Protos. It's chilling. It can go first. It can go second. It's just big chilling. It's the same decks it's always been. And it's just, yeah, it's meh. It is what it is. Tier Elements, solo mode. Really don't need to talk about that anymore. No, in all seriousness, like I want to kind of put this here because I don't actually think it's experimental. I think the deck is pretty much just done for. Merly Ban hurts so much. Like anyone still coping on it, thinking, "Oh, Merly Ban's not that bad. We still have Kit." Yeah, no, Merly Ban sucks, guys. Merly Ban sucks. The Havness hit is really, really sad. The Tier Elements Kashtira, the Tier Cash hit is really sad. both Millers being banned just makes it really, really, really sad. But obviously it's tier limits, like they're just like insane cards. So they can theoretically be played in other stuff and just like be good. So we'll see. I don't know. Like it's never like out of the realm of possibility for tier to just pop off. So I'm gonna put it in experimental just to be like kind of respectful to like what the deck is and what like all jokes aside, I'm just gonna be like put it here because of what the deck can be potentially. But on like a game in, game out basis, based on what we're seeing right now out of tier limits, this deck is solo mode, guys. Like this deck sucks. But just out of respect for it, I'll put it in experimental. Then we got Thunder Dragons. I mean, I'm going to put Thunder Dragons like up here with like, this deck is really good. Like the Bystials aren't great right now, but the Thunder Dragon cards are. Like Colossus is a hell of a card. Going first, it just completely shuts out like purely a lot of the Naturia decks. Like going first is just like really oppressive. Going second, I mean, it's like a big dragon deck, basically. You know, it can just break boards going second because it's just big dragons. And Arise-Heart's not like super insane against it because like all your Thunder Dragons like do like to get banished. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's worse than Dragon Link overall, but I think it can definitely compete. Then we got Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc. This deck is obviously like a meta contender. It's one of the best decks in the game. I don't really know. I mean, it's probably like, it might be better than Dragons right now, just because like I think it goes second better than Dragons do at this current stage of the format. I think it plays better into an Arise-Heart than Dragons do. I also think it plays better into a purely board than Dragons do, because like this deck can actually threaten lethal through an OR, whereas Dragons like really have to play like a Goddess or something to be able to threaten lethal, or the purely player just has to be bad. But this deck like can legitimately just lethal under an OR. Right, because like the brown bird, I think it's Sparrow. I'm sorry, I always forget the names. Yeah, this one, so Sparrow can make like your stuff untargetable. So if you're able to like make like recitals, if you're able to make like this stuff untargetable, particularly this one, like if you're able to make this untargetable and then like turn off all damage, then just like lethal through Starling. I want to apologize for any bird players out there for me explaining this in the probably the most terrible way possible, but you can definitely lethal under a Noir if the purely player doesn't know what they're doing, or if you have enough gas. And under a Arise-Heart, like, I mean, like, yeah, the banishing sucks, but it's not like the end of the world for this deck. This deck can still play under it, somewhat at least. And obviously it's going to play ways to address it, so this deck's very good. And then going first, obviously, the only deck that really competes with this deck when this deck goes first are decks like Labyrinth, maybe Runick that can like just like play without monsters pretty well, and maybe purely if they have a full gas hand and they're playing like a Dark World package or like a value generating package like the Shadal cards that just generate you so much advantage and allow you to keep playing despite them bouncing your stuff. But overall, birds are like absolutely insane, and I think it's 100% in the contender category. Branded's obviously up in contender category as well. The biggest issue with this is like it has to play cards like Plasma or Kaijus or something kind of like gross to be able to compete with like Noir, because Noir is just so oppressive against it, and also like Arise-Heart is very good against it, because yes, this deck at one point in time could side Shifter and could play Shifter. The deck's much more combo focused now than it used to be. So Arise-Heart hurts a lot more than it would have like Branded from like a year ago or a year and a half ago. But that Branded's obviously like just objectively worse. Really what you got to do now, you just got to go Renbrum. And if you're able to like make a Renbrum under Arise-Heart, then you're going to be able to stop the Arise-Heart with the Renbrum, because Arise-Heart's mandatory. So you can just bounce it, but you have to kind of open the Branded Fusion, then your Branded Fusion gets banished, then you have to be able to use like Kit to get it back. It's just kind of messy, and it makes Branded in a really weird spot. It puts Branded in a really weird spot. Also, Ash Blossom's probably going to be pretty good in this format, because for the most part, the Unicorn ripping from the X deck is not going to be like bad for most decks. it kind of sucks purely for them ripping like Zeus. But for most other decks, you can just like Ash the Unicorn, or if you maybe want to, Ash the Field Spell, right? Or maybe Ash the Oasis, I don't know. Ash something in Kashtira. And because of that, like Ash is going to continue to be popular. Also just Max C, right? Everyone plays Ash because of Max C. So Brand is just kind of gatekept by Ash in that sense. And this, I'm kind of rambling about Branded now, but Branded has been like trying, I think, somewhat to adapt to play around Ash better by using cards like Branded and High Spirits and Verte. But by having Arise-Heart in the format, High Spirits becomes like so much worse because High Spirits just doesn't generate any value anymore. So yeah, I don't know. Branded's in a weird spot, but obviously it's Branded, so it can still compete. It's like still a phenomenal deck. Then the final deck I want to talk about is Rescue Ace. So really quickly, I want to pull up the Rescue Ace cards. I just want to talk about what we're getting and what we're not getting. I don't know the full list of cards that we are getting, but it is my understanding that we will not be getting Preventer and we will not be getting Emergency because these cards came out in a separate set. In TCG, they came out in Dune, whereas all these other cards came out in like a set earlier on. So if we get everything, which I don't think we are, this deck will be very, very good. If we got everything here, this deck would be like top tier. However, if we don't, I'm just going to put this here because I can't put it back down to the bottom. Yeah, we'll talk about Rescue Ace in just a second. Sorry. If we don't get these two cards, the deck is just like not a real thing. The reason these two cards are so important is because Emergency makes your Airlifter a one-card combo. So basically what you do is you go normal summon Airlifter, search Emergency, summon, blah, 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 blah. Keep playing. Whereas without this, you don't really have any like one card combos in the deck that are like super strong. You might have some one card combos with like, no, you probably don't have, I don't really, wait, is it this one? No, it's this one. It's definitely Airlifter. I'm sorry. I'm still learning this deck a little bit. So yeah, I'm pretty sure the one card combo is Airlifter, search Emergency, then play from there. If we don't have Emergency, then the one card combo is not going to really be a thing, and you're really not going to be doing anything on your first turn. The reason Preventer is really necessary for the deck is because this card reads, you can banish one Rescue Ace card from your graveyard, especially this card from your hand. If you control another Rescue Ace monster, quick effect, you can target one effect monster your opponent controls, flip it into face down defense position. So this is an interruption that you can theoretically get out on your opponent's first turn if they go first, because these cards can just like summon themselves sometimes. So being able to play on your opponent's turn, kind of like how Tyr did, is what like made this deck like really good in the OCG, because it can just like kind of like stifle your opponent's plays and then just play on your turn. And also if like you just set this up on your first turn going first, it's another interruption, which the deck does have other forms of interruption as well. Like I think it's got a monster negate somewhere, or something like that. When your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, you contribute this card. You contribute this card from your hand or field, special summon one Rescue Ace from your deck. Okay, that's not it. One of them's a negate. Sorry, this is really embarrassing now. But one of them, I'm pretty sure one of them's a negate. But the deck is kind of just like lackluster without Preventer and Emergency is my understanding of it. My very limited understanding of it. Because obviously I've not played this deck. I don't play TCG anymore. So I've not played with this deck. But based on like the footage I've seen and like the discussions that I've kind of had about it, these two cards are kind of what brings the deck to life, right? And it gives you the one card combos. It gives you the proper disruption that you need for it to actually be a very good deck. So temporarily, I don't really know what to do with it. I mean, I guess I'll just put it in like kind of struggling, and it's kind of struggling simply because all its support is not out. But I don't know. That seems a little unfair to it, but also everything else seems unfair to it as well. Because it's just an incomplete product, right? And one day this deck will be very good. But anyways, that is going to do it for the tier list. This tier list is going to be the season 22, / Flame of Fury meta / Kashtira meta that will be starting up here in about 3 days at the time of recording this. So yeah, let me know in the comment section below, like what I got right, what I got wrong, and what videos you'd like to see from me in the future. With that being said, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.